Okay, so this is part 2 of civil liberties. So now we're going to move into the case Wisconsin v. Yoder from 1972, and this deals with the second part of freedom of religion. So religion and that freedom in the First Amendment actually has two parts. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, which we just looked at with Engel v. Vitale, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So this is the free exercise clause, and this looks at uh, whether or not the government, or like when can the government interfere with your ability to practice your religion. So free exercise, what that means has been defined in several court cases, but we're only going to be focusing on Wisconsin v. Yoder because that's the only one that's required for the AP exam. So the constitutional question relating to this case is a compulsory education law in Wisconsin a violation of the free exercise clause of the First Amendment? Must Amish students attend school after 8th grade, even if it violates their religious views? Their belief is that higher education would interfere with their simple life, so the Amish live a simple life without modern technology, that they kind of choose not to use kind of the more worldly. They try not to focus on things that are like material or worldly. They don't use cars, they don't use electricity. And having this simple life, according to the Amish, is essential for them to go to heaven, to achieve their salvation. So an Amish family did not want to, and a group of Amish families did not want to send their children to school after 8th grade because they felt that this was interfering with their ability to exercise their religious beliefs. And the question was, can Wisconsin make kids go to school even if it violates their religious beliefs? And the Supreme Court sided with the Amish family. And they said, yes, the law is a violation of the free exercise clause. And the reasoning behind this was the law essentially makes a decision for parents. And the parents are the ones who get to make decisions about their children's religion. And it further, and this is kind of one of the exceptions that we talked about in the previous video about when there can be limitations on your individual rights. And this establishes that if you are part of an actual documented religion with real religious practices and a law does threaten your beliefs, then you may be exempted from the law. And it's not all beliefs. It has to be something that's pretty well documented. Like the Amish church is really well established. It's been practiced. It's organized. They have documentation of what they believe. And you essentially, so what this ends up meaning is that you can't use religion to get out of otherwise legal activity. Like you can't necessarily say, oh, well, I'm part of the church of pay no taxes, I don't have to pay my income tax. Like, no, you're not. Like the church of pay no taxes is something you made up. You can't murder somebody and say, oh, well, you can't send me to jail, I'm part of murder church. Like, no, it has to be something that's really well established. And there are a number of cases that followed this one. There were a couple of different cases looking at the use of peyote in peyote, which is a hallucinogenic drug, using that in Native American churches. There are a couple of cases revolving around Santeria, which is a syncretic religion from Cuba that involves animal sacrifice. So there are a number of different cases that have come up surrounding this, but generally the rule is that if you are part of a very well-established, well-documented religion, then at times that can get you out of an otherwise legal behavior. So things like not sending your children to school would be a law that you would have to follow. But in this case, the Amish family, their religion, that going to school interferes with their ability to practice their religion. There are a number of cases looking at this exact question and becoming a little bit more specific that followed Wisconsin v. Yoder, but you don't need to know them right now. If you're interested, take a civil liberties class in college. So let's look at freedom of speech. Schenck v. U.S. This one, I think you know probably from U.S. history last year. Charles Schenck, he was arrested under the Espionage Act during World War I because he was passing out anti-draft pamphlets talking about how the draft was part of the capitalist threat to the United States and the capitalist threat to the world, and the draft is all part of this, the bourgeoisie stepping on the necks of the proletariat. So he was arrested for giving out these pamphlets, and that's a question: was this a violation of the First Amendment? And the court said that no, his arrest was not a violation of the First Amendment, and this is where the fire in a crowded theater analogy comes into play. So the First Amendment does not protect speech that intends to result in a crime or danger to the United States. That's what the Supreme Court decided. And in this case, advocating draft dodging during a war is similar to yelling fire in a crowded theater. It creates unnecessary danger and panic. The Supreme Court later specified this and made it a little bit clearer in a case called Brandenburg v. Ohio that was decided in 1969. And they changed that standard from the like yelling fire in a crowded theater, that they made it a little bit more specific, and they said that it would have to be speech that led to imminent lawless action. So, like for example, your freedom of speech protects your right to say that you want to kill the president. Can't be arrested for that. But let's say you're giving that speech out in front of the White House, you're passing out guns, you're giving people maps to the West Wing to show them exactly where the president is located. In that case, you can be arrested because your speech is inciting an immediate crime. It's not protected. The immediate crime would be the assassination of the president. You're doing it in front of the White House. You're giving people like the means and the directions for how to do that. So Brandenburg v. Ohio is the more recent standard, and speech that leads to imminent lawless action can be limited. It's not protected. Imminent means like it's going to happen soon. So like some sort of illegal activity is going to happen almost immediately because of your speech. So then the speech questions in 1969 come up in the context of schools. So do First Amendment speech protections apply to schools? So this is the case, again, that I think you learned about last year in U.S. history. The students in Des Moines, Iowa, wearing armbands as a peaceful protest against the Vietnam War, they were suspended, asked to take off the armbands. So do you have these rights in school? And the decision was yes, that you do have First Amendment rights in schools, and especially freedom of speech. And the reasoning is that students, you don't shed, this is the quote, shed your constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. And now there are some like exceptions to this, and the guiding idea here for a number of cases that followed relating to students' rights that, again, we don't have time to get into, they are pretty interesting. If you're curious, although we're not like physically in school anymore. So I guess it's not necessarily that pressing that you know these things. But schools are responsible for keeping students safe. That essentially the school becomes your parent when you're at school, even if you're 18. As long as you're enrolled in a public school, the school is your parent. So this is like the reason why you can't like just go home for lunch or go to McDonald's at lunchtime, because the school's responsible for you. And if something were to happen, like if you got hit by a car and you got injured, then the school is responsible for that, and your parents could sue the school. The other part of this is that school officials cannot censor students because they do not support the message content. So if someone, like you couldn't get suspended for wearing a t-shirt that says, I like Donald Trump. And let's say Mr. Ballas does not support President Trump and he sent you, gave you OSS for wearing that shirt just for that reason, that the school can't do that. The school can, however, censor you if they feel as though it could lead to like criminal behavior, or if it promotes criminal behavior, or if it's going to lead to violence. Like, you know that wearing a shirt that says, I like Donald Trump, if you wore that into a classroom at T.C. Williams, that's probably going to lead to some sort of debate or argument, and that's going to disrupt the learning process. And in that case, the school can ask you to remove that t-shirt. And that would be because it's going to disrupt the school's goal. And the school's goal is to give you a safe place to learn. And that's the same reason why you cannot wear like t-shirts that advocate drug use. You could be asked to take off a t-shirt that was like advertising some sort of alcohol, and it's for that reason. So this case we already know. We talked about this with media. New York Times Company v. U.S. from 1971 can stop like prior restraint, like stopping publications. Is that a violation of the First Amendment protections of the press? And in this case, it involved the Pentagon Papers, the documents that were going to reveal sort of the secret history of the Vietnam War. And we know that the outcome is that, yes, prior restraint is a violation of the First Amendment. And the reasoning is that the government cannot stop the press from publishing unless publishing such a document would lead to inevitable, direct, and immediate event threatening the safety of Americans. So essentially, everything else could be published without interference. And this is why press is the most the freest of the freedoms and the First Amendment. And it's the closest thing to an absolute right. That if you're interested, you can take a look at, so the movie The Post with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, that looks at that case, New York Times v. U.S., but it looks at it through the lens of the Washington Post, that the Washington Post and the New York Times both had the Pentagon Papers and were both publishing. And it looks at their decision whether or not to publish the documents. There's also a documentary on Netflix right now called Nobody Speak, Trials of the Free Press, that also kind of looks at more contemporary issues relating to freedom of the press. It looks specifically at Gawker Media, and Gawker Media being sued for its publication of some information relating to the professional wrestler Hulk Hogan. But the freedom of the press is probably it is like the freest thing. It's the closest thing we have to an absolute right. And it was decided in a few cases in the late 1990s that the internet is part of free press. So the internet is press. So that's essentially why you can post pretty much anything on the internet without interference, because it is the press. You could get in trouble, of course, for posting anything that would lead to direct, immediate, inevitable harm that would threaten the safety of the United States and Americans. All right, so I'm going to pause the video here because in the next section, part 3, we're going to take a look at rights of the accused, and that relates to the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the Eighth Amendment.